Hello everyone who has come and listened. I am Jay. Today I would like to tell you a story. She sold paintings to pay for chemo. Then a Hollywood legend walked into her life. Please listen. The beginning. Linda Monroe's fight against fate. At just 16 years old, Linda Monroe had already learned more about suffering and resilience than most people do in a lifetime. Art had always been her escape, a world where she had control. But now, her world was spiraling beyond her grasp. The sterile smell of antiseptic, the beeping of heart monitors, the cold, impersonal hospital rooms. This was her new reality. It started with fatigue. Then came the bruises that wouldn't fade, the relentless aches in her bones, the dizzy spells that stole her breath. When the doctors finally sat her parents down in that small windowless office, their faces said it all before the words even came. Acute myeloid leukemia, a rare and aggressive form of blood cancer. At first, Linda thought she could fight it like a battle in one of her paintings. Bold strokes, vibrant colors, sheer willpower. But cancer doesn't care about willpower. It drained her, physically and emotionally. The chemo burned through her system, robbing her of her strength, her energy, even her hair. Every time she looked in the mirror, she saw someone unfamiliar staring back. Her parents tried to stay strong for her, but Linda wasn't blind. She saw the hospital bills stacking up on the kitchen counter. She overheard the late-night whispers, the conversations filled with anxiety over how they would afford another round of treatment. The insurance had run out, and their savings were long gone. Her father, once so steady and sure, now spoke in hoarse, tired tones. Her mother tried to smile, but her eyes held nothing but exhaustion. One night, lying awake in her hospital bed, the weight of it all crashed down on her. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was watching her parents drown in debt trying to save her. That's when it hit her. Art had always been her refuge, but what if it could also be her weapon? She pulled out her sketch pad, hands trembling from the latest round of treatment, and started drawing. A stormy sky, a lone figure standing against the wind, a girl who refused to be erased by fate. The next morning, she made a decision. She wouldn't just sit back and wait for a miracle. She would make one. With her mother's help, she set up a small art stand in the heart of the city, a wobbly folding table, a few easels, and a stack of paintings she had poured her soul into. Each brushstroke carried her desperation, her fight, her refusal to disappear. A handwritten sign sat in front. Original art. Help fund my cancer treatment. She knew it was a long shot. She knew people might just walk by without a second glance. But if she could sell even one painting, maybe, just maybe, she could buy herself a little more time. And so, Linda sat in that chair, under the scorching summer sun, waiting for someone to see her. A ray of hope in the chaos. The first day at the art stand was brutal. Linda sat on her small metal stool for hours, feeling the heat radiate off the pavement, the sun beating down on her thin frame. A few people glanced at her display but kept walking. Others slowed, eyes flicking to the sign in front of her table, then away just as quickly. She told herself not to care. She told herself to be patient. But patience was hard when time wasn't on your side. A woman in a navy blazer, carrying a designer handbag, paused for a moment. She admired one of Linda's paintings, a twilight skyline, deep purple hues bleeding into streaks of gold. Linda's heart leaped. Maybe this was it. Maybe she'd finally make her first sale. But then the woman sighed, shook her head, and kept walking. Linda let out a slow breath, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself. She had prepared for rejection. But she hadn't prepared for this feeling of being invisible. Minutes turned into hours. Her water bottle sat half empty beside her, but she felt too exhausted to even reach for it. Her body ached, a cruel reminder that she wasn't just fighting the world, she was fighting herself too. Then, finally, someone stopped. An older couple approached her stand, their faces kind but cautious. The woman ran her fingers lightly along the edge of a canvas. A vast desert scene, painted in warm, earthy tones. "This is beautiful," she murmured, turning to Linda. "How much for this one?" Linda swallowed hard. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 100 times, but now that it was happening, she felt frozen. Would they think it was too expensive? Would they walk away like everyone else? She forced her voice to stay steady. $80. The couple exchanged a glance. The man nodded. "We'll take it." For a second, Linda didn't move. Her brain struggled to process what had just happened. Then, as the woman handed her the cash, something inside Linda cracked wide open. Her first sale. Her first victory. It wasn't much. It wouldn't even cover a fraction of her medical bills. But in that moment, it wasn't about the money. It was proof that someone had seen her. That her art mattered. That she mattered. She carefully wrapped the painting in brown paper, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed it over. The couple smiled, wished her luck, and walked away. Linda sat there for a long time after they were gone, staring at the $80 in her hands. Maybe she really could do this. But hope is a fragile thing. By the end of the day, Linda had only sold that one painting. $80. It was better than nothing, but it wasn't enough. She packed up her canvases, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle deep in her bones. As she made her way back home, she tried not to let the disappointment sink in too deep. Tomorrow would be better. It had to be. The unexpected spark. The second day was no easier. People walked by, some offering polite smiles, others pretending not to see her at all. A man in a crisp suit stopped long enough to read the sign in front of her stand. Original art. Help fund my cancer treatment, but his mouth pressed into a tight line before he turned away. Linda exhaled slowly, pressing her hands into her lap. She refused to cry. Not here. Not now. Then came the worst type of visitor. A man in a leather jacket, sunglasses perched on his head, sauntered over to her stand. He eyed the paintings, not with admiration, but with amusement. "Nobody buys real art anymore, kid," he scoffed. "You should try selling prints. Or, I don't know, TikTok commissions." Linda's hands clenched into fists. She bit back the sharp response burning on her tongue. She had dealt with people like him before. People who didn't understand. People who thought dreams weren't worth chasing. She didn't need his advice. She just needed to fight. "Thanks," she said simply, keeping her voice calm. "But I'll take my chances." The man snorted, but didn't argue. He walked away, blending into the crowd like nothing had happened. Linda let out a slow breath. She wouldn't let frustration win, because somewhere in this city, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, someone would see her. And then just as she was beginning to think this day would be just as fruitless as the last, someone did. A young woman in her late 20s, dark brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail, a press badge clipped to her bag. She stopped. She really stopped. "Did you paint all of these yourself?" she asked, flipping through the canvases. Linda nodded, unsure where this was going. The woman smiled. "I run a small online arts blog. I love finding hidden talent in the city. Mind if I take a few photos?" Linda blinked. "Wait, what? Really?" she asked, barely able to believe it. "Really," the woman said. She took out her phone, snapping pictures of the paintings, of Linda sitting at her stand, of the small handwritten sign that explained why she was selling them. Then she asked a question Linda hadn't expected. "What's your story?" Linda hesitated. She had never liked talking about her illness. But something in this woman's expression, genuine curiosity, not pity, made her want to answer. So she did. She told her about the hospital visits, about the endless medical bills, about how she refused to let her parents suffer alone. The woman nodded, jotting notes in the corner of her notebook. "People should hear this," she said. "I'll make sure they do." Linda didn't think much of it. People made promises all the time. But the next morning, when she arrived at her stand, something was different. More people were stopping, not just to look, but to buy. A woman bought 2 paintings in a row. The young couple debated which one to take home. By noon, Linda had sold more than she had in the past 2 days combined. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Lucas, her best friend. "Dude, check this out." She clicked the link. It was an article. Her article. "Fighting for art, fighting for life, the 16-year-old painting her way to chemotherapy. At the bottom, thousands of shares. Linda's heart pounded. This was real. But even then, she didn't know just how big this moment was about to become. Because her biggest customer yet, he was already on his way. The moment that changed everything. The summer heat hung heavy in the air, pressing down on Linda's already exhausted body. Sweat beaded at her temple as she adjusted the stack of paintings on her small folding table. She had been sitting here for hours, watching the world rush by, feeling more like an observer than a participant. Her sales had picked up after the article. People stopped more often, some just to offer kind words, others to actually buy her art. But even with the recent surge, it still wasn't enough. Not enough to cover the next round of chemo. Not enough to stop the ticking clock inside her body. The article had brought attention, but attention didn't pay hospital bills. And then, just when she thought this day would be like all the others, something shifted. She felt it before she saw him. A presence. A quiet, steady energy that felt out of place amid the city's chaos. Linda looked up. A man stood at her booth, hands tucked into the pockets of a worn leather jacket, a cowboy hat tilted low over his face. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't glancing at his phone, wasn't rushing to his next meeting. He was just there, studying. For a moment, Linda didn't react. She had seen all kinds of customers, curious tourists, skeptical businessmen, even the occasional art enthusiast. But something about this man felt different. She cleared her throat. "See anything you like?" Her voice was hoarse from the long day. The man smirked, just a little, just enough for her to notice. "Depends," he said, his voice gravelly, slow. "What's the story behind these?" Linda hesitated. Most people asked about the prices, not the story. She glanced at him properly this time. His face was lined with age, but his piercing blue eyes held something sharp. Something steady, like they had seen 100 lifetimes and still weren't easily impressed. She swallowed hard. "I paint because I have to," she said simply. "It's the only thing I can control right now." The man didn't blink. He just waited, letting the silence do the work. So she told him. She told him about the diagnosis, about the endless hospital stays, about how every brushstroke, every sale, wasn't just about survival, it was about taking back her life. And when she finished, the man didn't offer pity, he just nodded. Then without a word, he reached for a painting. Linda watched as he picked up one of her favorites, a black and white desert landscape, the silhouette of a lone cowboy standing in the distance, the sky stretched out in endless contrast. It had taken her weeks to perfect. The man tilted the canvas slightly in the light, studying it. Then he spoke. "I'll take this one." Linda barely reacted at first. She had done this a dozen times before. Customers picking a piece, handing over cash, walking away without a second thought. She swallowed. It's $200. The man didn't even reach for his wallet. Instead, he pulled out a checkbook. Linda blinked, thrown off by the unexpected gesture. Who even carried checkbooks anymore? She watched as he uncapped a pen, his movements slow, deliberate. Then he wrote something down, tore the check from the book, and handed it to her. She took it hesitantly, barely gripping the paper. And then she saw the number. Her breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred at the edges as her eyes locked onto the check. Not $200, not $2,000, $50,000. Her hands started to shake. This must be a mistake. She looked up at the man, her heart pounding against her ribs. I can't take this." The man smirked again, tilting his hat back slightly, and that's when she finally saw him. Clint Eastwood. Her stomach dropped. Her breath hitched. The Clint Eastwood, the legend, the icon. The man whose movies had played in her living room growing up, whose characters had defined an era of film, whose stare alone had been enough to silence entire rooms. And here he was, standing in front of her, holding her painting, handing her a check that could change her life. "It's not charity," he said, his voice as steady as ever. "It's a damn good painting." The world tilted. People were starting to notice now. The whispers spread. "Wait, is that Clint Eastwood? A woman nearby gasped. Someone else pulled out their phone. The hum of the city shifted into something electric. And then, the tipping point. A man in a suit, who had walked past Linda's stand earlier without a second glance, turned back around. His eyes darted from Clint to Linda to the check still clutched in her shaking hands. He saw the number. His jaw dropped. Wait, he just bought a painting for $50,000? That was it. The floodgates burst open. People swarmed her stand, their voices colliding into a whirlwind of disbelief. Oh my God, I need to buy one. Which ones are still available? She's going to be famous. Within minutes, paintings that had been ignored for days were snatched up one by one. People weren't asking questions. They weren't hesitating. They were buying. Linda sat there, stunned, as her once quiet booth transformed into the hottest attraction in the city. And Clint? Clint just stood there, calm as ever, watching it all unfold. Finally, he leaned in slightly, just enough for Linda to hear. Told you, kid, just keep painting. Then, he tipped his hat and walked away. Leaving Linda staring after him, her world forever changed. And the craziest part? This was only the beginning. The floodgates open. The moment Clint Eastwood walked away, the world around Linda erupted into chaos. What had started as a quiet, unnoticed booth on a bustling city street was now the center of everyone's attention. People weren't just passing by anymore. They were stopping, crowding, reaching for her paintings like they were rare artifacts. Her heart pounded as a woman in sunglasses grabbed a painting of a golden sunset over a lake. How much for this one? $150, Linda stammered, barely able to get the words out. I'll take it. The woman shoved cash into her hands before Linda could even process what was happening. I want one too. Another voice cut through the noise. Do you have anything in blues and greens? Linda scrambled to organize her remaining paintings, but it was impossible. People were reaching over each other, frantically flipping through the canvases. She felt dizzy. Not from the heat, not from exhaustion, but from the sheer surrealism of the moment. This wasn't just a good day. This was something out of a dream. A man in a tailored suit, someone who would have never glanced at her stand 2 days ago, held up a canvas of a misty mountain landscape. I'll give you $500 for this, he said. Linda's breath caught in her throat. $500? That was more than she had made in an entire week before today. She barely had time to process that shock before a teenage girl pulled on her sleeve. I don't have cash, but can I Venmo you? I saw your story online. I really want one of your paintings. Linda blinked. Her story online? Her phone buzzed wildly in her pocket, notifications flooding in faster than she could read them. Her hands shook as she unlocked it. The article. It had been picked up by bigger news sites. It was trending. Her name, her story. Clint Eastwood buying her painting for $50,000. It was everywhere. Her phone screen blurred as she scrolled through the comments. This girl is incredible. Where can I buy her work? She's literally painting her way through cancer treatment. Talk about inspiring. If Clint Eastwood says she's good, she's good. Linda clutched the phone in her trembling hands, her brain struggling to catch up. This wasn't just about today. This was going to change everything. The domino effect. The crowd didn't die down for hours. By the time the sun dipped below the buildings, her stand was completely empty. Every single painting was gone. Linda slumped onto the metal stool, breathless, overwhelmed. Her hands ached from packing canvases, her voice hoarse from answering so many questions. But in her lap, thousands of dollars in cash. Money that meant another round of treatment. More time. A real chance. The thought made her chest tighten with something between joy and disbelief. Then a shadow fell over her. She looked up. Charlotte Hayes, the journalist who had written the original article, was standing there, smiling. Well, Charlotte said, raising an eyebrow, looks like you had a good day. Linda let out a breathless laugh. That's an understatement. Charlotte pulled out her phone. It's only going to get crazier. Linda frowned. What do you mean? Charlotte turned her phone toward her, and Linda's stomach dropped. A national news network had just picked up her story. She wasn't just a trending article anymore. She was on the evening news. Her hands gripped the table as the realization settled in. This wasn't just viral. This was national. The offer that changed everything. Over the next 48 hours, her world exploded. Messages flooded her inbox. People from all over the country wanted to buy her paintings. Collectors, gallery owners, celebrities. Her phone rang nonstop. Radio stations wanted interviews. TV producers wanted to feature her on morning shows. Then came the email. Linda's stomach flipped as she read it. Subject: Gallery Inquiry. A prestigious gallery in New York City wanted to represent her work. They were offering a full showcase, an entire exhibition dedicated to her paintings. Linda had to read it twice, 3 times, before she convinced herself it was real. A gallery in New York. At 16 years old, she was being invited into the art world's elite circle. Her breath hitched. This wasn't just about paying for chemo anymore. This was her future knocking on the door. The fear that lingered that name. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the excitement slowly gave way to fear. Her parents were thrilled. Her best friend Lucas was practically screaming over the phone. But deep inside, where no one could see, Linda was terrified. What if she wasn't good enough? What if people were only interested in her story, not her art? And worse, what if she didn't have enough time to make any of this matter? She had seen her test results. She knew the reality. Even with the money, even with the best doctors, there were no guarantees. How cruel would it be to get everything she ever dreamed of, only to run out of time? Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had been given something most people never got. A chance to leave something behind. A chance to make her mark before the clock ran out. She reached for her sketchbook, flipping to a fresh page, and with a steady hand she began to draw. Because time was uncertain, but her art would last forever. A letter that changed everything. The days that followed felt like a blur. Linda barely had time to process what was happening. One moment, she was a girl selling paintings on the street, desperately trying to pay for chemo. The next, she was the center of a national conversation. Her story was everywhere, on social media, in newspapers, on TV. People she had never met were sending messages of encouragement, offering to buy her work, sharing their own struggles. She should have felt elated, but instead she felt overwhelmed. Dreams come true, but at what cost? The calls didn't stop. A producer from Good Morning America wanted to feature her. A Hollywood director wanted to buy one of her pieces for a film set. The New York gallery was finalizing details for her solo exhibition. Her inbox was flooded with emails from strangers. Some wanted to buy her art. Others wanted to donate money, even though she wasn't asking for charity. And then there were the messages that hit harder than she expected. Parents whose children were also fighting cancer. My daughter is 10. She's battling leukemia too. Seeing you fight for your dream gives us hope. My brother passed away last year. He was an artist too. I think he would have loved your work. Each message was a reminder that this wasn't just about her anymore. But even as her future opened up before her, a shadow loomed in the background. Because no matter how much money she had now, no matter how many paintings she sold, it didn't change the fact that cancer was still inside her. The next round of treatment was set, and there were no guarantees. The moment of truth. The day before her first New York gallery meeting, she sat in a hospital gown, out staring at the fluorescent lights above. Dr. Patel, her oncologist, sat across from her, his expression unreadable. The test results came back, he said, adjusting his glasses. The chemo is working, but not as much as we hoped. Linda's stomach plummeted. What does that mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Dr. Patel hesitated. It means we can keep fighting, but the road ahead is uncertain. Uncertain. That word had followed her from the beginning. Linda nodded, gripping the armrest of the hospital chair. She had come too far to let this destroy her now. She had work to do. A letter from Clint Eastwood. That night, after another exhausting day, Linda dragged herself up the stairs to her room. kicking off her shoes before collapsing onto her bed. Her phone buzzed constantly. Emails, messages, news alerts. But then, her mother knocked on the door, holding an envelope. "This came for you." Linda sat up, confused. She wasn't expecting any mail. She took the envelope, her hands trembling slightly as she read the name on the corner. Clint Eastwood. Her breath caught. She carefully tore it open, unfolding the thick sheet of paper inside. And then she read, "Clint Eastwood. Linda, I've played a lot of cowboys in my life. Some of them were good, some of them were bad. But they all had one thing in common. They never backed down from a fight. Neither do you. Your story reminds me why some fights are worth having. You don't just paint pictures, kid. You paint stories, and stories last forever. Don't stop telling yours." Clint, why he had chosen. Tears blurred her vision. She had spent weeks wondering why he had done what he did, why he had stopped at her booth, why he had given her that check, why he had chosen her. And now, she understood. It wasn't just about her art. It was about what it meant. A choice that mattered. Linda wiped her eyes, staring at the letter in her hands. For weeks, she had been struggling with a question. What do I do with the time I have left? She had the money for treatment. But if it failed, what then? Should she keep fighting? Should she spend whatever time she had left chasing a future she might not even get to see? Or should she do something bigger, something that would outlive her? Her fingers tightened around the letter. She already knew the answer. 1 year later. A year had passed since that day, and the world had changed. Linda's paintings now hung in galleries across the country. Some sold for thousands. Some were donated to hospitals, to cancer centers, to places where people needed hope. Her story had inspired a national movement, a foundation that helped young artists facing medical struggles. She didn't just raise money for herself. She raised it for others. And the best part? She was still here. She had beaten the odds, at least for now. The cancer wasn't gone, but she was still painting, still telling her story just like Clint had told her to. And on the wall of his home, in a private collection of some of the greatest cinematic relics in history, hung a single painting. A lone cowboy, standing against the wind, fighting until the very end. A legacy that would last forever. The world had changed for Linda Monroe. 1 year ago, she was just a girl sitting at a street corner, selling paintings to pay for chemo. Now, she was a name people recognized, not just because of Clint Eastwood, but because of what she had done since. Her paintings had traveled further than she ever had. Some hung in galleries in New York, Los Angeles, and even London. Others were in hospitals, placed in rooms where patients fought battles just like hers. Parents wrote to her, telling her how their children, scared, sick, searching for hope, stared at her artwork and found something to hold on to. And Linda? She was still here, still fighting, still painting. But she had learned something along the way. This was never just about her. The foundation that changed lives. After her story went viral, something incredible happened. Donations had poured in, some from people who just wanted to help her, but others with a bigger message. Use this to help others like you. At first, she didn't know what to do with it. She wasn't a charity. She wasn't a movement. She was just a 16-year-old girl trying to survive. But then, a thought struck her. What if she could be more than that? What if she could help other kids who were like her? Kids with dreams. Kids with talent. Kids who weren't just fighting for their lives, but fighting to create something before it was too late. So, with the help of her family, her best friend Lucas, and some of the people who had believed in her from the beginning, the Paint It Forward Foundation was born. It started small. Grants for young artists battling serious illnesses, funding for medical bills, scholarships to art schools. But soon, it grew into something much bigger. Hospitals reached out, asking if they could showcase her work. Schools wanted to feature programs where students, healthy or sick, could express themselves through painting. And then came the biggest surprise of all, the return of Clint Eastwood. Linda never expected to hear from him again. After that letter, after those words that had carried her through the hardest moments, she had assumed that was the end of their story. But one day, her phone rang. It wasn't a reporter. It wasn't a buyer. It was Clint. "Heard you're making something real special, kid," he said. Her breath caught. He wasn't talking about her art. He was talking about everything else. "I don't make donations, but I make investments," he continued. "And I'd like to invest in what you're building." Linda didn't know what to say. Clint Eastwood, the man who had already changed her life once, was now offering to help fund her foundation. But his money wasn't the most important part. It was his belief in her, fighting for more than herself. Linda knew the truth. Her cancer wasn't gone. The doctors had been honest. Her battle wasn't over. It never would be. But she had defied the odds once. And even if she didn't get the lifetime she dreamed of, she would make every moment count. Because this wasn't just about fighting to survive anymore. It was about fighting to leave something behind, to create something bigger than herself. She had always thought art was about color, about light, about movement. But now she knew the truth. Art was about impact. Her paintings had been her way of fighting back against fate. Now, her foundation was her way of giving that power to others. Because every kid with a dream deserved to be seen. And if she could be the reason one more child picked up a brush, one more teenager held on to hope, one more person realized their story mattered, then that was enough. The final canvas. One afternoon, Linda stood in front of a blank canvas in her New York studio. She had painted hundreds of pieces since that first day on the street. But this one felt different, because it would be her last. Not because she was giving up, but because it was time for her work to live beyond just her hands. She picked up her brush, and with slow, careful strokes, she painted a field of golden light stretching toward the horizon. In the distance, a single figure stood, not alone, not afraid, just standing tall, looking forward. Linda smiled. She knew what came next, because her story would live on, even if she didn't. And somewhere, in a hospital room, or a small apartment, or a struggling artist's studio, another kid would pick up a brush and start telling their own story. If Linda's story moved you, if you believe in the power of resilience, art, and never giving up, then join us on this journey. Subscribe to the channel and be part of a community that celebrates stories that inspire, stories that remind us why we fight, why we dream, and why we create. Every video brings you tales of courage, unexpected twists, and the impact one person can have on the world. Don't just watch. Be part of the conversation. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let's keep these powerful stories alive. Because every story deserves to be heard. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like, share, and leave comments for the story.